Who slept with the dictator? Stalin's intimate secrets. 1. The Tyrant's Chamber. Stalin's intimate secrets. November 9, 1932. The Kremlin, Moscow. The great reception hall was bustling. Communist Party leaders were celebrating the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution. Laughter, speeches, vodka. In the center, Joseph Stalin, the father of nations, dominated the room. The political propaganda event concealed an intimate drama poised to explode. At a side table, his second wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, 31, refused to drink. Her face was a mask of tension, a clear contrast to the Stalinist pomp. Stalin's inner circle, composed of loyal apparatchiks like Vyacheslav Molotov, viewed the Vojt's private life as an insignificant footnote. The only thing that mattered was the consolidation of power and ideological purity. The main enemy at that moment was political deviation, not infidelity or domestic turmoil. Molotov and the Politburo underestimated how intertwined the cruelty of the public man and the tyranny of the husband truly were. Molotov's speech, diplomatic voice, diary memoir excerpt. Comrade Stalin bore the burden of building socialism in one country. His personal problems, such as his wife's temperament, were irrelevant to the cause. They were women's affairs, not state matters. Our task was to approve the next purge, not arbitrate domestic squabbles. The leadership underestimated the capacity of Nadezhda's private and desperate act to expose, even for a brief moment, the dark soul of the man who controlled the USSR.
Stalin's project was the total censorship of his intimacy. He built his myth as a pillar of unshakable strength, whose life was solely dedicated to the party. The truth about his relationships, from the romance with the Georgian virgin Kato Svanidze to the affairs in Siberian exile, was kept in absolute secrecy by the NKVD. Stalin's project faced critical failures in its execution. The biological trail. Despite efforts to maintain secrecy, Stalin's passion and promiscuity in exile resulted in illegitimate children, Kostya and Alexander. In the 1930s, the NKVD had to force the mothers to sign secret documents committing never to disclose the secret origin of their children, a failure that required the use of the security apparatus to maintain the intimate secret. The domestic contrast. Nadezhda Alliluyeva, the only person with daily access to Stalin's brutality, refused to be the old hag the system expected. She tried to study, work, and finally challenge him publicly. Fatal conflict. Testimony excerpt from intimate friend Irina Gogua. In Iosif's presence, Nadia seemed like a fakir performing barefoot on broken glass, with a smile for the audience and a terrible tension in her eyes. She never knew what would happen next, what would explode. The peak of the failure came during the Kremlin party when Stalin shouted at her, "Hey, you, drink!" Nadia replied with the only weapon at her disposal. "My name is not Hey." Transformation of perception and suspense. That night, Nadia fled the hall. Hours later, in her Kremlin bedroom, Stalin's gun, a Walther pistol, was used for a shot that silenced the only voice that dared to confront the dictator up close. Nadia's act, suicide, was not a case of illness, but an intimate political act that exposed Stalin's domestic cruelty. The shot echoed not only in the Kremlin, but in the secret archives of the Politburo. From that night on, the world would know. The man who could govern millions could not control his own home, and the inner circle of power was about to become a circle of victims.
2. The Heart of Stone. The First Love
and the rejected son. Youth and the clandestine romance. Before he became Stalin, the man of steel, he was Yosef Jugashvili, the revolutionary hardened on the streets of Tiflis, Tbilisi. His first wife, Ekaterina Kato Svanidze, was a poor, fiercely religious Georgian girl. Kato met Yosef through her brother, Alexander Svanidze, a Bolshevik colleague. At 24, Yosef fell in love with Kato, then just 16. The marriage, in 1906, had to be performed in an Orthodox church, an ideological compromise that Stalin made for love, one of the rare moments when a woman's faith superseded the revolutionaries' atheist doctrine. Conjugal life and silence. The marriage lasted little more than a year. Kato was shy and modest, hiding under the table when her husband's Bolshevik friends visited, a stark contrast to the brutality of revolutionary life. In 1907, Kato gave birth to their only son, Yakov Jugashvili. The revolutionary life, however, was unforgiving. The tragedy and the public mourning. In December 1907, Kato Svanidze died, likely from typhus or tuberculosis, common diseases in the unhealthy Baku of the time. Stalin's reaction was that of a shattered man. Witnesses at the funeral described the revolutionary in deep anguish. Legend has it that he jumped into the grave after the coffin. Stalin's statement, moment of the funeral, direct testimony. This creature softened my hard heart. When she died, all my tender feelings for people died with her. This phrase, recorded by biographers and witnesses, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. After Kato's death, the tender man disappeared, replaced by the cold, paranoid Stalin, the man of steel, Stal.
Abandonment and the paternal fracture. After Kato's death, Stalin abandoned Yakov to the care of the Svanidze family, immersing himself in revolutionary activity. Stalin's eldest son grew up without his father, a fracture that never healed. When Yakov moved to Moscow in adolescence to live with his father and the new wife Nadezhda, the relationship was disastrous. Stalin despised his son's shyness and lack of discipline, treating him with contempt. Suicide attempt episode. After an argument with his father over an engagement, Yakov attempted suicide by shooting himself. Stalin, choleric response, he can't even shoot straight. The final fate in war. Yakov Jugashvili, an artillery officer, was captured by the Germans in 1941. His captivity was exploited by Nazi propaganda. The Germans offered to exchange Yakov for German Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, captured at Stalingrad. Stalin, ruthless response, I do not trade a marshal for a lieutenant. Yakov Jugashvili died in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp in 1943 under controversial circumstances, whether he committed suicide on the electric fence or was shot. Stalin's refusal to rescue his eldest son sealed his image as a leader who prioritized the motherland and power over family love.
The inner circle of terror. The Stalin, who claimed his warmest feelings had died with Kato, did not hesitate to crush her family during the Great Purge of the 1930s. Kato's brother, Alexander Svanidze, who had introduced Iosif to his wife and was a loyal Bolshevik, was a victim of the repression. He and his wife Maria were arrested. Alexander bravely refused to confess to being a German spy, being executed in 1941. Maria Svanidze, his wife, died in prison, and the wife of Kato's other brother died in exile. Stalin's love offered no immunity. The only thing Stalin's first wife had softened, his heart, was the first target of his paranoid cruelty.
3. Loves of Exile, the Dictator's Biological Trail. Exile and Opportunity. Kato Svanidze's death threw Stalin back into the life of a clandestine revolutionary, marked by arrests and exiles in Siberia. Away from the moral rules of Tiflis, the revolutionary found new relationships, often marked by status difference and necessity. In 1911, Stalin was exiled to Solvychegodsk. There he rented a room with the young widow Maria Kuzakova, who already had children. The relationship developed quickly. The illegitimate fruit. Maria became pregnant. However, Stalin's exile time was dictated by the Okhrona, the Tsarist secret police, not paternal responsibility. He left Solvychegodsk in 1912 before his son's birth. Kostya Kuzakov. The son, Konstantin Stepanovich Kuzakov, was born without knowing his father. He would be the first of 2 known illegitimate children Stalin would leave behind in Siberia. The most perverse case. The second known case of exile is, by far, the most disturbing. In 1914, Stalin was exiled to the remote village of Kureka in Turokhansk, Arctic Siberia. He stayed at a peasant woman's house. The woman who became his lover was Lida Pereprigina. At the time, Stalin was 37. Lida was only 14 years old. Forced cohabitation. Stalin lived with Lida from 1914 to 1916. During this period, Lida had 2 sons. The first died. The second, Alexander Jugashvili, was born in April 1917, registered with Stalin's original surname. The broken promise. In the village, the age difference in Lida's pregnancy led to accusations of seducing a minor. Stalin was forced to promise to marry Lida to avoid trouble with the Tsarist police. But, as with Maria Kuzakova, as soon as his exile period ended, Stalin abandoned Kureka and the promise.
The silenced mothers. After Stalin rose to power in the 1930s, the children of exiles became a threat to the Vos's immaculate image. The NKVD, the secret police that terrorized the nation, received orders to solve the problem. The 2 women, Maria and Lida, who had written to Stalin asking for help without receiving a reply, were forced into the state censorship system, the Protocol of Silence. In 1932, Konstantin Kuzakov, Maria's son, was forced by the NKVD to sign a secret document committing never to disclose the truth of his paternity. This was Stalin's trademark, using the state repression apparatus to conceal his personal promiscuity. The fate of the illegitimate children. Despite the imposed secrecy, Stalin maintained discreet control over his children's fate. Kostya Kuzakov, Maria's son, managed to study at Leningrad University and later rose to colonel during World War II, working in the Central Committee apparatus in Moscow, perhaps with his father's discreet help. Alexander Jugashvili, Lida's son, also survived the Stalinist period, but both were forced to live in the shadows, their identities denied by their biological father. 4. Intimate life in the era of terror, lovers and sexual paranoia. The contrast between art and power. After Nadezhda's death, Stalin governed as a widower, but his need for affection, or control, was filled by a series of lovers, many of them connected to the world of art, a reflection of the Soviet obsession with using culture as propaganda. Olga Lepeshinskaya, a Bolshoi theater ballerina, was considered Stalin's favorite among the circle of ballerinas and typists. Although she never publicly admitted an affair, Stalin enjoyed watching her performances, sent her flowers, and invited her to Kremlin receptions. Olga Lepeshinskaya, nostalgic, cynical voice. We ballerinas were all in love with him. He could be very gentle and very good, but that was probably just our impression, because by nature he was a wicked, vindictive, and evil person.
Vera Davidova, The Recorded Confession. The most explicit case is that of opera singer Vera Davidova. Her memoir, Confessions of a Stalin Mistress, published in London in 1983 under contested but widely accepted authorship, details a 19-year relationship. The protocol of harassment. The relationship with Davidova was an exercise in absolute power. The first meeting, after a Kremlin reception, was orchestrated with an anonymous note and a driver waiting. At Stalin's dacha, country house, the invitation was an order. Vera Davidova, memoir account. Comrade Davidova, undress. Fear was the constant. How could I resist or refuse? At any moment, with just a word, my career could end or I could be physically destroyed. The reward for silence and submission was state favor. Davidova won an apartment in Moscow and received the prestigious Stalin Prize 3 times. The dictator bought artistic and sexual loyalty with state money and recognition. The personal housekeeper. Stalin's last woman was his personal housekeeper Valentina Istomina, known as Volya. She was the only constant female presence in his secluded life at the Kuntsevo dacha, taking care of his meals and his bed for 17 years. Volya was originally promised to General Nikolai Vlasic, chief of Stalin's personal guards, but when Volya caught the Vorst's attention, everyone backed off. Her submission was total. Abuse and paranoia.
Valya's tragedy exposed the toxic environment of paranoia and sexual predation that permeated Stalin's inner circle. When Stalin fell ill, Valya was sexually harassed and abused by his 2 closest protectors, Nikolai Vlasic and, more sinisterly, Lavrenti Beria, the head of the NKVD and the Soviet Reich's biggest sexual predator. Beria's trial in 1953 revealed a long history of rapes using his position of power. Upon learning that Valya had been betrayed, Stalin, in a fit of paranoid rage, reacted not against the abuse but against the impurity. The reversed sentence: Stalin gave the order to send Valya to the sinister gulag in Kolyma, Magadan. Vlasic, his personal guard, was also arrested. Beria, who had participated in the abuse, was the only one spared. Fortunately for Valya, the order was reversed, but the episode demonstrated that in Stalin's environment, female loyalty was a concept of medieval purity, and any mistake was punished with extermination. The tyrant's death and Valya's tears. Stalin would die in March 1953, lying on the floor of the Kuntsevo dining room. The final scene of his intimate life is narrated by his daughter, Nadezhda Alliluyeva. Valya Istomina, the housekeeper, knelt beside the body, crying hysterically. Nadezhda Alliluyeva, account, 20 letters to a friend. She fell on her knees beside the sofa, dropped her head on the chest of the dead man, and began to cry loudly like a village woman. Until her last days, she was convinced there was no better man than my father. Valya Istomina's blind loyalty to the man who had ordered her to the gulag summarizes the effectiveness of Stalin's tyranny of affection. The mystery of who slept with the dictator is resolved with a tragic conclusion. Stalin's women were victims of the same system he imposed on the USSR, a system of absolute control, where personal life was a state secret and love a currency that bought protection or resulted in death. Stalin's intimate secret was not his charm but his predictable cruelty.